What if you woke up tomorrow and the trial for a serious crime took less than 24 hours, and the punishment was carried out immediately in the town square for everyone to see? We're diving deep into the brutal reality of law enforcement on the American frontier, where justice wasn't blind, it was a spectacle. Before we reveal the shocking methods used to keep order, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into history. And while you're watching, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Imagine a crowd gathered in a dusty city square, not for celebration, but for the most morbid spectacle imaginable. Thousands of spectators, even children, would arrive with picnic baskets to witness a person's final moments on the gallows. This wasn't an isolated incident, but rather the general face of justice across the American frontier. From the mid-1800s to the early 1900s, punishment in the Wild West was swift, public, and brutally effective. Where formal law had difficulty taking root over vast territories, communities developed their own methods of maintaining order, methods that would shock modern sensibilities. These weren't just punishments. They were warnings etched in flesh and displayed for all to see. The frontier demanded harsh measures, and those who broke its rules paid a price that left indelible marks both on the body and in the memory. Long before courthouses dotted the western landscape, justice traveled on wagon wheels. The companies of the wagon courts elected councils empowered to administer their own system of justice, consisting of judges, jurors, and executioners recruited from their own ranks. These traveling tribunals heard everything from minor disputes to capital crimes, often delivering verdicts within several hours after the crime was committed. For minor crimes, the councils usually appointed mediation, while for more serious crimes, the sentence could include public flogging. When a murder occurred on the trail, the emigrants chose a jury, who formed a semicircle around the accused. At the same time, fellow pioneers watched, copying legal procedures they remembered from the East. The speed of frontier justice was legendary. In 1859, John Steffel was convicted and hanged within 48 hours of the murder of his son-in-law for his gold dust in Denver, a settlement of only 150 buildings that still managed to attract thousands of spectators to witness the execution. The reputation of territorial judges was based on their severity. Isaac K. Parker, perhaps the most famous judge to use hanging, sentenced 160 people, 79 of whom were actually executed by hanging during his 21 years in Fort Smith, Arkansas. These impromptu courts operated out of practical necessity, and not from legal precedents, establishing order through visible and immediate consequences. The scorching hiss of hot iron pressed against the body served a double purpose on the frontier: to identify criminals and to prevent crime through irreversible disfigurement. Borrowed from the practice of branding cattle, the branding of people left visible marks on criminals for life. Their crimes literally were written on their bodies. In 1790, in Jonesboro, Tennessee, John Wilson and Joseph Folsom, convicted of stealing a horse, were punished in the pillory, where they endured 39 lashes before their right cheeks were branded with the letter H and their left cheeks with the letter T. The letters served as a constant advertisement for their crimes, ensuring that no one in the community they were joining would be left ignorant of their past. Horse theft, especially a serious crime in a society dependent on these animals for survival, regularly resulted in branding along with other severe punishments. This practice went beyond simple identification. In 1640, a Virginia court sentenced a runaway slave to be branded with the letter R on his cheek, while thieves could be branded with a T on one's forehead or hand. Some frontier settlements used this punishment for repeat offenders of less serious crimes, creating a visible record that followed the criminals wherever they went, so that they could not travel unnoticed. The psychological impact was as strong as the physical pain, because branded people were rejected by society and deprived of the opportunity to start a new life. The brand served both as a punishment and a harbinger of further ostracism. The cracking of the whip echoed throughout the settlements on the border as one of the most common forms of corporal punishment. When English settlers arrived in the New World, they brought with them not only their religious and social customs, but also various forms of criminal punishment, and flogging proved easily adaptable to frontier conditions. Flogging posts stood in prominent places in city squares, often near courthouses or in vacant lots, serving as a constant reminder of the consequences of breaking the law. Punishment instruments ranged from simple leather whips to the infamous cat-o'-nine tails, weapons with multiple straps that could leave backs raw, scarred, and bloodied. In 1846, a reader of the Raleigh Register newspaper was outraged after witnessing the humiliating flogging of two men, where the 39 blows they received left the skin of each man rough, scarred, and covered in blood. The number 39 had a special significance, being one less than the biblical 40 strokes, a measure designed to prevent accidental death, but at the same time ensure severe punishment. Border communities used flogging for various offenses, from public drunkenness and brawls to theft and assault. In the wagon trains moving west, more serious crimes could include public flogging as a punishment, with the accused being stripped and beaten in front of his fellow travelers. The public nature of the punishment served several goals. It humiliated the criminal and satisfied society's demands for justice, and served as a harsh warning to potential lawbreakers. Unlike branding or mutilation, scars from floggings could sometimes be hidden, giving criminals a chance at redemption if moving, although the memory of public humiliation often proved as lasting as any physical trace. The scaffold wasn't just a structure. It was the ultimate stage for frontier justice, where formal law met public spectacle. During the Wild West era, hangings were massive public events attended by literally everyone, attracting thousands of people. Spectators rarely missed the executions and often even brought their children with them. Despite their inherently dark meaning, these events were meticulously and officially planned. The Santa Fe County Circuit Court in New Mexico in 1849 found that the cost of a single hanging exceeded $110, which is the equivalent of more than $4,500 in today's money. Territorial governments took on the substantial costs of lumber, labor, coffins, ropes, and other essential materials. Professional executioners took genuine pride in their deadly work. George Malden, known ominously as the King of Executioners, preferred to use a rope 1.5 inches thick, which was first soaked and air-dried, then expertly greased with lard or soaped to soften it. Over 2 decades, he carried out at least 60 executions. The entire process became increasingly sophisticated. Formulas for a clean hanging were developed, in which the knot of the noose was located on the left side of the prisoner's neck, which was intended to quickly render him unconscious. The condemned were always allowed to utter their final words, which varied considerably. In 1850, one of 5 convicted Cayuse Indians in the Oregon Territory asked if missionaries had taught them that Christ died to save his people. Doctors were present to certify death, although their presence wasn't always mandatory, as in the famous case of outlaw Black Jack Ketchum in 1901, whose head was severed from his body during a horribly botched hanging. These legal executions, however theatrical, represented desperate attempts to create an official justice system in territories transitioning from lawlessness to an organized society. Did you know that botched hangings were disturbingly common? Hit the like button if you want us to do a whole video just on the most infamous execution failures of the Wild West. Among the most noticeably disfiguring punishments inherited directly from colonial practices was the cropping of ears and noses, which served as a permanent mark of serious criminals. In various jurisdictions of the original 13 colonies, even relatively minor crimes, such as stealing a pig, were punished by whipping in the pillory and cutting off or even docking the ears. This cruel tradition continued fiercely in settlements on the border, where constant disfigurement served both punitive and preventive purposes. The procedure varied in severity. In 1755, in Charles County, Maryland, a young African-American woman was pilloried for perjury and not only flogged, but also had her ears cut off. Some criminals had their ears nailed to the pillory, forcing them to stand motionless for several hours before their ears were violently cut off to free them. The punishment endured from earlier periods, when in the Southwest Territory, which later became the state of Tennessee, under the frontier law established in 1780 by the Cumberland Treaty, Judge John McNary sentenced the first horse thief in Nashville in 1793 to 1 hour of chaining, 39 lashes, and having his ears cut off and cheek branded. Nose docking, although far less common, was used in some jurisdictions for especially serious crimes. These mutilations ensured that the criminals would never be able to escape their past, because their disfigured faces told everyone they met about their crimes, effectively creating permanent social exile even after serving their sentence. These extreme punishments reflect the deep struggle of frontier society to establish order over vast, untamed territories, where traditional law enforcement was virtually non-existent. What today would be perceived as excessive brutality in border communities was perceived as a necessary deterrent. The highly public nature of these punishments served practical purposes in scattered settlements where news spread slowly and central power remained inherently weak. Every brand on the cheek, every cut-off ear, every body hanging from the gallows carried an unmistakable message, which did not require written laws to understand. As territories transformed into states and formal justice systems finally took root, these brutal practices gradually disappeared, giving way to imprisonment and less visible forms of punishment. Nevertheless, their legacy remains in our collective memory of the Wild West, reminding us that the veneer of civilization was indeed thin on the American frontier, where survival often exacted a terrible price from those who challenged the fragile social order. We hope you learned something truly surprising today about the Wild West. Make sure to subscribe to see more hidden history and turn on notifications.